So my presentation is going to be a little different because it's a good bit more informal than some of what I heard earlier. I'm sorry I couldn't be here to begin with. I had a class. So where I started out was I was teaching a third semester German for 3 or 4 consecutive semesters. And my observation in there was that they just had enough insufficiently processed grammar that they got really frustrated with speaking and really nervous about it, especially if they had to speak in front of the whole class. And so since I'm somebody who was trained by people in my department in using drama techniques in the classroom, I experimented with that and found informally that this helped to get students out of this speaking anxiety barrier. And so I wanted to see if I could find a little more actual evidence that that was actually happening. That was the one side. And the other side was that in the first 2 of my classes, my G200 classes, I had an isolated black student teach. And we had a multicultural unit in that class and a discussion about racism. And in both classes, what happened was that, first of all, the black student shut up entirely during that discussion. And second of all, when we were doing group work, the discussion in the group was a black student and it was extremely stifled. And so what happened, obviously, was that there was stereotype threat in the class. They didn't have a whole lot of linguistic material to work with. They had to discuss this in German. It's a really hot-button topic. And so it was really frustrating for them and also for me because nothing really worked. And so I wondered what I could do with this to make it work better. And so that was inside the study that I'm reporting on. This was a kind of informal actual research type project that was the other reason why I did this in the format I did. So when I'm talking about drama techniques, this is a lot of words on a page, but it's not really important. So this is just stuff you can ignore. But there are lots of drama techniques. Many people use role play in their classes. That can be very closed as a dialogue in a textbook, where you just repeat what's already in the textbook. Or it can go all the way to what they call process dramas and open scenarios that go maybe over several class periods. That are spontaneously negotiated by the students among themselves, and the teacher just stands back as facilitator or as a teacher in role or something like that. So it's not only role play, but in my class, things happened also like a town hall meeting, something like doubling. So one person is standing there acting out a figure but not saying anything, and the person behind is saying what they're actually thinking. Okay, so that's a nice strategy because then one person only has to do the acting and then somebody can volunteer and say, okay, this person is thinking that. And then hot seating, which is one person becomes, so to speak, an expert for a fictional figure or somebody you have encountered in the text. And the other people are able to ask them questions and they can make up answers, and these answers can come from the text, but they can also be things that you creatively expand about how you imagine that figure. So that's, if you are not familiar with them, that there are lots of good sources to look at that. So what I wanted to look at in terms of the study started with the idea before you even start learning. As I said, I was going to look at the speaking anxiety. So that's under individual differences, and that's basically the situation in your classroom before you even start to learn. What kind of attitudes do people come with, and how does that affect your ability to learn? And the traditional thing with affective filter comes from Dulé and Burt in 1977, and from Krashen, who I don't agree with on other fronts, but this is also just common sense, because if you're anxious, you're not able to learn as well in many ways. Speaking anxiety, there is a lot of research on that by various people. Basically, the idea is that it connects to willingness to communicate, which is basically in a given situation, how likely are you to want to speak? So if you're more anxious, you're less likely to speak. It also connects to motivation. It's all kind of difficult with individual differences. There is a lot of discussion how to actually measure them. There is a lot of different surveys out there, so it's all a little inexact, and people have various ideas about it. The thing is also that for a long time they were seen as traits, And you could argue for that. There are people who are naturally more anxious or less anxious, but also in a classroom, your situation changes all the time. You might be more anxious in one constellation with one particular student than you are otherwise. You're maybe more anxious if you're talking to the whole class instead of working in groups. So things have moved towards looking at anxiety and other factors as situational factors via stimulated recall of video data and things like that. So generally what they find is the lower anxiety and higher motivation, higher willingness to communicate lead to a higher speaking rate and then indirectly to higher oral proficiency. That's kind of the general idea there. And for me, narrowing the field where I draw my sources from is one study by Kang in 2005 who looked at anxiety in native speaker, non-native speaker dialogues via stimulated recall interviews. And she did a thematic analysis of her discourse data that she got out of that and found that the categories that predicted willingness to communicate most were the feeling of safety, which included for her feeling familiar, not anxious, basically. Excitement, so passionate about the topic, something like that. And responsibility, the need to keep up the conversation, that's how she describes it. And the other source is Piazzoli, 2011, who did a study on in a process drama classroom of Italian, also via stimulated recall interviews over the drama sessions, and various other types of qualitative data. And she found that drama techniques can contribute to willingness to communicate and can actually help to overcome anxiety. So both these, there's also lots of other evidence in more informal studies and practitioner reports, but there is no comparison groups and no really quantitative stuff. And so I wanted to try and kind of get comparison group in and maybe do something quantitative as well. But the research questions are obviously derived from these. Does the use of drama techniques have an effect on speaking anxiety? Can I actually find evidence for that? And then is there evidence that other factors like excitement and responsibility can overcome anxiety? So what I did, this was a mixed method classroom study, and it was conceived as a pilot, and I haven't gone on with it, so it's a small study and it doesn't tell you very much, but this is what it is. So this was an intermediate German. I had 2 sections with identical syllabi, and the study ran over the 4.5 weeks that covered the multicultural unit. In the drama group, so the drama group is the classroom where drama was used, it focused on drama techniques at least a day per week, sometimes a little more. And the comparison group had highly interactive teaching, but without drama formats. And so the people in the group were 21 and 19, but the one that returned all the data were only 9 and 16, so that's a problem right there. The data I collected, some were quantitative, online surveys on speaking anxiety, one a more trade-like survey from the literature from Durney and Sizer, and then a less tested survey by Young on particular speaking activities that are likely to happen in a language class. And they did these surveys at the beginning and at the end of the study. And these were statistically analyzed. And then the qualitative data were external observation notes by colleagues that came in once a week on the same day in both classes. Those were different observers, but it was the same observer per day. So. And then a teacher journal, I kept a teacher journal. I was a teacher in one of the classes. And then there was online student activity feedback on the observed days. They got 4 questions about their reactions to the particular activities that day. And that was handled with an emergent thematic analysis, starting with the categories that Kang came up with, but also seeing what kind of, do they match what I see in the data, which other categories might matter for my data. And then the students got written comments on their feedback for me so that they would get some information out of the study as well. Results, quantitative, very little. So the comparison group actually got more anxious over the study period, which was absolutely not intended, but that's what happens. And in the drama group, you didn't see a single thing happening quantitatively, not statistically significantly anyway, so total washout. However, if you narrow the anxiety questionnaire about the particular speaking activities down to those that were just whole group activities, which most of the drama activities are, you got a tendency, so careful, that to show that the anxiety was reduced in the drama group over the study period, but not in the comparison group. So these are very, very low-level quantitative results to be taken with big heaps of salt. And that's what you see here. This is just the drama group where you see the anxiety going up from pre-study to post-study. But as I said, it's not significant, any of it. Qualitatively, it looks a little bit better. In the drama group, there was quite some evidence from students reporting back that the drama helped them to speak in spite of the anxiety they felt. A good bit of the activities that they were most nervous in, which were often drama activities, were also the activities where they reported speaking most during that class period. So I could see some of that, which was good. And also there was a clear sense that drama supported motivation and excitement, and that the sense that you had to keep up the conversation because you had a role, you had some kind of function in this, so you had to do something, you had to speak. For some people, not for all, but for a few, they actually literally said, you know, when I have a role, I speak. I have a role, you know. There is a reason for speaking. And then on a larger scale, for me, the perception was that the class dynamics, after the study, we had no drama for quite a while. And they just went back to their regular student attitude, sitting in their chairs, and I was like, And then we had drama again, and they immediately came back alive. So this was fun, but not officially documented. The other thing that was interesting was that they had oral presentations. They had to present their own political parties right after the drama period and right after the study period, and they acted these out much more than I had seen in the last few semesters, and this did not happen in the comparison group. So these are teacher journal effects that obviously I can't document systematically, but that are suggestive. So that not only I get to speak here, this is the first two of these are representative student quotes. I enjoyed very much the part of class where Frau Weber was the old woman and we got to voice our opinions. At the beginning of the semester, I didn't like the whole speaking in front of the class, but now I feel like it has helped me gain confidence speaking German, as well as help my pronunciation by articulating. Another said, I spoke the most German during the old lady questioning because I had a role. So, and then there are some things that didn't fit into the categories, but that I thought were interesting because they show how diverse people react. So not everybody's happy with drama, not everybody talks on a given day. And then also just some observations that come up that have nothing to do with anything here. I don't know why, but asking questions is harder than answering them. So this is a drama effect. This is when we were doing hot seating. But it doesn't have anything to do with the questions I asked. So there are other things that students find interesting about the stuff that I wasn't looking for. Then somebody from the comparison group, they obviously benefited from teaching as well. I have become more and more comfortable with at least attempting German out loud in front of the class. And then from my group, I was too tired to be motivated to speak in any language. So it's not just the teacher, it's not just the teaching, we all know that, and there was definitely evidence for that. Issues in the study that I found were, obviously I was teacher and I was researcher, so that's, for a formal study, that's really a big no-no. And it was, since it was just a pilot study, it was okay, but if I did anything bigger than this, I wouldn't want to have the situation, except if I did a full-scale ethnographic situation, and that will be different. So that's a problem. Video recording would have been better. because you just have your own impressions, you have a bit of feedback, but you don't really have data this way. Also checking on coding, I did my own coding and thematic analysis and had nobody check on it. Survey issues are bad. I used surveys from the literature, and I didn't just look at anxiety, I looked at motivation and willingness to communicate as well. With all those surveys, the problem was that the surveys really did not apply very well to what I was actually doing in class. So the willingness to communicate and motivation surveys were complete washouts, because some people just marked them the same number all the way through, because they related so little to what we're actually doing. However, in the literature, they're counted as reliable. On the other hand, one of the not reliable surveys from Young matched very well what my classroom was doing, and so that was the most useful one where I got the most results. So it's really complicated. Then voice, I also got the feeling I was analyzing all the data. I'm choosing what to present here today. And so there is a question, how much sense does that make when you're looking at a classroom that is a really complicated entity? Some people talk about involving your students in research, so that's also an interesting thing to think about for me. Reality is just time. If you plan a study in a classroom, classrooms don't function like you always want them to, so something may take longer, something may go much faster, and it's just not very plannable. And so if I planned drama on a particular day and wanted to have observers there, I had to arrive at the point where the drama was actually going to work that day in the content that I was teaching, and so it was a little iffy. Then space, I was teaching in Sycamore Hall. We had a classroom that was just bigger than the students that I had accumulated in there, and it's crazy. Then what's difficult also was the response rate to online surveys and feedback, and I know I have another friend who's doing a classroom study who has the same issue here. When you do online feedback, even if you give points for it as homework, which made sense in this case, you often don't get a great response back. So that's something I don't know how you can optimally handle this. If you have any suggestions on that afterwards, I would be happy to hear them. Obviously, you need IRB approval. If somebody opts out, also out of videotaping, you can't use the data. But even in your own classroom, when you're doing a study, and this is obviously not for something generalizable, but just for yourself to get a better sense of your teaching, you can get IRB approval if it's within the scope of normal teaching procedures and you're not doing anything invasive. They will let you do that. I thought I got a much better sense of the dynamics in my classroom, and also because I got different perspectives on it from the observers. One interesting that came up was that 3 of my observers sat on the front of the classroom, the 4th sat in the back of the classroom. And she came to me afterwards and said, "You have 2 classrooms. You have this little group back there that is doing something entirely different." And I was like, yeah, to some extent I was aware of that, but it's also, where is the observation happening? I mean, we know this, we know that it depends what data you get from where you look. But this was really a good example of that. Yeah, journal keeping, I found that highly helpful. And then we know it's not always the teaching. And then also the students reflected regularly on what they were doing in class. And this is something I've since implemented journals for my students, learning journals, learning diaries into my teaching as a matter of course, because I saw them thinking about what they were doing in class, and I thought we needed more of that. So that was something that came out of that as well. Now my little informal action research thing. So the first round of dealing with the stereotype threat was just, okay, our textbook is, relatively monoperspectivic. I don't know if that's a word, but anyway. And I'm white and middle class, and so I'm not a very good representative of minority culture or minority perception of Germany. And Germany is still often seen as a white monolith, although it's far from that. So the first thing I thought I'd do was include some additional perspectives in terms of an optional film because I can't affect the syllabus is not mine. So I offered an optional film and I brought in a couple small differentiated materials. Absolutely no change to the next semester. Still pretty isolated effect. So then I thought, okay, I have to do something about this. I started reading up on multicultural teaching and critical pedagogy, and started planning a very small intervention with a drama sequence and still my optional film. And I also explicitly told them, you know, this is the problem we're having here. Our textbook is not very diverse. Our class is not very diverse. I'm white, so this is going to be uncomfortable, but this is part of the process. I told them that. I went back to the L1 for that, so that we could know what we're talking about. And then we went into this little film that we have in the class about a racist event in Germany in a streetcar, and had a little sequence of setting that up and playing it as it was in the film, where people all sit there silently and don't do anything when there's racist slurs being made, and just feeling this uncomfortable situation, and then going back and brainstorming in the ideal world, what would we want people to say if we would want them to say anything, what would we do? And they did that in groups among themselves, and then the scene was played again, and I played the racist woman so that none of the students would have to do that. And they basically told me, you know, stop, you should get out of the streetcar, and so that was good. And our the black student at this point also volunteered to be in the scene, because I think she had realized by that time, okay, this is going to be all right. I don't have to be afraid of actually getting racist slurs here, because people had already said this is really uncomfortable. We don't like what this racist woman is doing. So she'd gotten that message. And then, just not to demonize that person in the streetcar, older white woman uttering racist slurs, we went back and hot seated her and had 3 students actually do this together. They sat in the middle, and the class was allowed to ask her questions, and they had to answer. And so that was another perspective we got on the characters. And we did clear the air, so the dynamics in the class became much better for the rest of the unit and also for the rest of the semester. And also just the relationship between the black student and me changed noticeably. And that's obviously something you can't generalize it. It's something that worked that time, and I wouldn't say it would work every time, but I think it's worth attempting those little things and thinking about them, because it does affect a lot for the people in question. So that's really all I want to say.
Maybe you have mentioned it, but I wonder how many students you have in the class?
I have up to, in this class it was 21 students.
Oh, it's a big class.
Yeah, I mean German, mostly white people take German. That's kind of the tradition. We sometimes do have minority students in there, but usually not very many. Yeah.
When I've used drama in a classroom, some people warm up to it and some people are really do not like it.
Yes.
And so I wondered if motivation again would be a factor. If you said, we're not grading this, nobody's judging this today, and if you participate, you get a Snickers bar, or you get to leave class 10 minutes early, or I'll erase your lowest score on a homework, you know, all semester long, or something that's completely different than some judgmental factor of others speaking in their way.
Right. The thing about drama is you don't have, there are many ways of participating. You don't have to be the person who says everything. And that's important when you conceive of those drama activities, that you kind of plan that in. That you don't have all roles that have to speak spontaneously all the time. You also have people who are in the background, who are listening and picking up on things, who can react if they want to, but they don't have to. You have things like the thought tapping, where you have somebody who's just giving the pose, and another person gets to talk. So they're involved and they're listening because they're interested in what's going to happen, and so they're learning. But they don't necessarily have to speak spontaneously, so you can adjust it to the comfort levels of different people.
Cool.
And that tends to work fairly well. Yeah.
Just, would you say that, based on, I don't have the limited results, but that it may not really be anxiety per se that's the issue? That is, it's okay if students are anxious, what you want them to do is overcome that. Do you understand what I mean? I mean,
Can you say that again?
so they have these surveys that says they're anxious.
Yeah.
But maybe you can't change that.
Mm-hmm.
But will they be willing to set that aside?
Yeah.
In order to participate in this activity in which you're getting the results you want, which is they are speaking more. And it doesn't matter that they're anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be overstated, that the impact of anxiety might be overstated. If a person can be anxious but is able to overcome it enough to still do whatever they have to do.
Yeah, I think there is certainly a level of anxiety that you don't overcome
Yeah,
with
and
drama.
it might
Yeah.
not, anxiety can be good if it can be
Yeah.
motivating,
Yeah.
like I'm anxious about speaking, therefore I'm going to improve my speaking, so
Right.
I.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely,
yeah.
and there are a lot of factors. I mean, in the thematic analysis, what I also found is that a lot of people just didn't know how to express something, and that's a factor that has nothing to do with anxiety. Well, maybe with anxiety to make a mistake, but it's also just missing confidence in your skills or feeling that you don't have the words. And there are lots of factors that go into this. So, and the study is not controlled in any way. I mean, there's lots of things going on in this classroom, so it may not even be the drama. I mean. According
the
to this,
survey
yeah.
results may not matter.
Hmm?
The survey may not matter
Yeah,
in terms of what's going on.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
okay, in terms of survey questions, their anxiety level didn't change, but what you care about is did they speak more?
right.
And if they did, then I
Yeah.
don't care if they're anxious.
Yeah, to piggyback on this, I wonder if you at some point would consider collecting data on how they're improving in terms of linguistic production, like whether they're actually producing more sentences, like number, quality, different levels of language.
Yeah. And
yeah.
there's a little bit of literature on that already, where people have looked at, different question types, for example, that people produce, turn-taking patterns, how many topics do they initiate, things like that. It's so far mostly studies where you get the feeling, okay, I can't really tell whether this is the drama or just the interaction type. There is a study that I was just reading by Pekalek, a French study actually, and she just looked at different kinds of interaction in the classroom, no drama at all. And she found obviously that different interaction types and genres inside the classroom also produce very different turn-taking mechanisms. So it's always difficult to know what to compare it to. Not only drama does this. Yeah, but that's interesting.
Sorry. Your study was 4.5 weeks, and did the students meet 3 times a week? Was it 3
They
times?
met 3
15?
times a week, 50
Okay.
minutes,
Oh.
yes.
It seems like you might have some of the same concerns with gaming. If you had word games, German word games up in front of the class, there would be some students who would really be interested in that, and other students who would say, I'd rather die,
Yeah. And that's what you always have in the classroom. I mean, that's why you diversify
Yeah.
your offers so you can catch different learning styles, different
Yeah.
interests. Yeah. Yeah.